You see what Max has done is it's placed all of our UVs for each of these different faces on our box all over the top of each other. So they're all overlapping. So that's no good. What you'd have to do is, in Max, if I was using Max, what I'd do is I'd select all my UVs here and I'd do a flatten mapping. You see how that breaks our UVs up into individual pieces and not all overlapping each other? So now if I brought that box into Unreal, I wouldn't have any problems because there's no overlapping UVs. By all means, you can still go through and stitch these different sections together if you wanted. So say you were doing a texture paint, you wanted the texture to follow around that corner. You can still stitch them together. Let me just find an edge here. So you see what that's done is it's stitched our two pieces together. So you can do it that way. But no, if you're just doing a straight up box mapping like that, no, because that's going to cover up all your UVs. They're all going to be overlapping each other. You can't have them on top of each other. You see that side is the same as that side. They're all on top of each other. Which, yeah, you're going to get problems in Unreal. It's not going to shadow correctly. And you're going to get warnings when you import your mesh saying you have overlapping UVs. So you're saying there's no way around decreasing texture resolution because of this? No. You can still decrease your texture resolution. You can use a tiling map on, say we can't map it this way, okay? Because when we bring this into Unreal, it's going to be a problem. We have to map it so each individual face of that cube is on its own UV island. Let me just do that again. Like that, so they're not overlapping. Now you're saying, you have to increase your texture to get a good looking mesh. You can use your tileable texture this way. You can still use your tileable texture like that. Just make sure that your sides here are stitched together. So you have like a T shape, a regular T shape where you've got 3 on the top and 1 at the bottom type thing. You can still use your tileable small texture that way in Unreal. They'll still tile across correctly. So you don't need to rely on a big texture or things like that. So use a small tileable texture on a UV map like this for an object like this, and just increase the tiles to make the texture smaller to make it look more high resolution. That's a valid way to do it. You're not going to get a great looking texture map doing it that way though, because when you start tiling textures, you're going to get, again, let's jump back into Unreal and look at our terrain. If I pull up a bit and have a look, you see this, you start getting a repeating pattern. I haven't actually textured up the ground here properly yet because I haven't got to it. But using a tiling texture, you start getting this repeating pattern, and that's always been a problem with tileable textures. You're going to see this repeating pattern all the time, which is why I try and avoid using them as much as I can anyway. So don't think because you have to have your UVs all separate, you have to use a larger texture map. You can still tile your textures, even with your UVs broken up like that. Okay. And now I probably even confused you more. Let's make sure our terrace here is lined up along our path. I may have to move some of our trees out a little bit, I think, because I don't want them intersecting. They're not intersecting too much, to be okay. I'm just going to pull back here and look at our path from a distance, so I may make sure it does look correct. Alright, so we have our main gate here, where our camera is going to be flying through. And we're going to come to our small terrace section, raised terrace section here, which will come up, and then we're going to come back down again, down our steps, until we get to here, which is the end of our actual garden pathway. And from here on, we're going to be placing our Art Deco building in the middle. The real Defied Chaos is saying, how did you texture each wall of your building? They're all separate UV. Yes, they are. They're all separate UV maps. It's one texture, painted texture, like I showed you before in Max. Separate UVs. So none of the UVs are overlapping. I'm not using any tiling textures. They're all texture maps that have been done in Photoshop or done with a camera to create my building here. So yeah, the front is one UV texture, the sides are different UV textures, different texture maps. So I'm using 2 texture maps, one for the front, one for the back, and one for each side, because each side is exactly the same. All right. So we have our garden terrace here. Again, I'm just making sure that the positioning looks right. I want to make sure my positioning is correct before I start painting in the foliage, because it'll be more of a pain than to have to move it once I have everything else going on the side. So if I pull it that way, it's going to push that one that way. Okay. I'm just going to rotate it around just a little bit. Because again, I wanted to make it look like it's following our pathway. I may actually just move it over a little bit as well. That should be good. All right, now we also have some urns that are going to go on top of our garden terrace here. The real Defied Chaos is saying he thinks he always tries to texture too many things on a single map. Yeah, you don't want to spread your texture map too thin, otherwise your textures are going to look really blocky and when you render it or when you use your game engine, they're going to look too low res. And again, this terrace is a good example. I'm not using one texture map for that entire terrace. I'm using one for the steps and the sides, I'm using one for the columns, and I'm using one for the top. So there's 3 different texture maps on this one object. I'm not trying to do all of that in one texture map. You could, but it would mean you'd have to make your texture map high resolution. So to get the same look, I'd have to use maybe, you know, a 2K texture, whereas now I'm using 1K textures. I'll end up in the overall using less memory, using 3 textures as opposed to one really large one. Draw calls is a different matter though. So is it okay to have a building made up of, say, 5 different UV maps even if they're not reusable? It is, that's perfectly fine. It can get a bit complicated when you start. We're talking about a game here, I'm assuming. You're using a game engine, whether it's Unity or Unreal or whatever. If all you're doing in your 3D program is rendering out, like you're using Eon View or V-Ray or the renderer that comes with your 3D program, it's not an issue. You don't have to worry about it. Just go for your life. If you're making a game, it can become more of an issue because of draw calls. The more draw calls you have on an object, the slower the engine will perform. So long as you don't go overboard, it's still fine. Generally, it's better to have 1 texture as opposed to 3 on an object like this in a game engine. But if you're careful and you do it here and there, then it's not a problem. And like I said, I've done it here. I'm using 3 textures on this object as opposed to 1. And that's fine. I wouldn't suggest you use 10 textures on an object. That's getting a bit high. And what I mean by draw call is every time the engine loads this model up, it's looking at the first texture, which is 1 draw call, which is the steps, the second texture, which are the columns, which is the second draw call, and then the top, the 3rd texture, which is a 3rd draw call, as opposed to 1 draw call if that texture was all 1 object. So it's not a problem so long as you're careful and so long as you don't go too high, so you don't use like 10 textures on 1 object. If your object is that complicated that you need 10 textures, start breaking the model up into bits and pieces. instead of trying to make it all one model. Again, let's use my terrace here as an example. If I wanted each of these steps to have a unique different texture, as opposed to just using one texture map, I wanted to use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 texture maps. And what I'd do is I'd break my steps up into 5 separate objects and import them that way, not make them all one object like that. But to get back to your question, yes, it's perfectly fine to use 5 different UV maps, even if they're not reusable. That's fine. You want to try and avoid it as much as you can, but you can do it. It's not a problem. Just don't do it for everything. Okay, so we have our garden terrace here. Again, I'm just going to pull back and check it. Back around this way and check it. Okay. Alright, let's start. And again, you see my reasoning for doing that is I've covered up that shadow line quite nicely, added more interest to the scene. Now the shadow line here will be covered up by vegetation. So Adam Nor, hi, thanks for popping into chat and saying hello. Again, if you're, I don't recognize your name, maybe you're not been on my channel before. My name's Phil, I'm a 3D artist. We're working on an Art Deco building interior and exterior here. We're working on the environment for it at the moment. We're making it in Unreal 4.15.2. Again, if you've got any questions, please feel free to pop into chat and ask me. I'm here to help you as much as I can. So that's what we're doing. We're going to be bringing this Art Deco building into Unreal, and we're doing a cinematic where we go inside the building and fly around the environment. Once we finish working on our actual interior, outside environment that is. So again, let's just for Adam's benefit, let's turn on our exponential height fog and have a look at our environment. We haven't rebuilt the lighting, so it might look a bit odd. So we're creating our outside environment here that we're going to be placing our Art Deco building in. Small pond area we've got going on. And then we have our main gate here at the front, which is where our camera is going to start before we start pulling inside the landscape to get inside the building. And we're using speed tree plants, so all the plants are animated, wind animated. So this is, like I said, the lighting here looks a bit off because we've been adding geometry and the lighting needs to be rebuilt. So some of our plants are looking a bit green. We are using a custom LUT in Unreal, which is a custom lookup color table, because the default coloring in Unreal is very green, and I wanted to knock it back to make it look more cinematic. So I'm actually using a LUT color lookup from an actual real-world camera to make sure my lighting looks correct. I went through that on stream last week. All of my previous streams are on Twitch under the video section, or I have a YouTube channel as well, Phil Does 3D. There's a link to my YouTube and social media underneath of my Twitch page here, where you can find those videos if you want to look at how I do my LUT color lookup in Unreal. So let's start painting in some of our environment. Let's turn off our exponential height fog again to make sure that it doesn't get in the way. Alright, so this is a garden path. So we don't want these lower res trees we're using here on the outside of our hills. We want to make it a bit more interesting, and we want to add some flowering bushes and things to make it less green and more pretty, for lack of a better word. Just going to deselect my terrace there. Now, I actually want to bring in the urns, so they're going to be sitting on top of these 4 columns, so let's do that quickly. Path urn, that's the one we want. It's just telling me my mesh is very small, that's okay. We'll fix that up. No, we just have to make sure our shader is correct as well though. If I can find where it's put it. It'll be this one here. So we have our color map for our urn, a stone base color. We do want to make sure we import our normal map and our ambient occlusion. So we want our metallic, our ambient occlusion, our normal and our roughness. Let's pull them into our shader here. The metallic, ambient occlusion, normal and roughness. Okay, we'll start with our metallic. Then we go to our normal. And then we go to our roughness. Then finish it off with our occlusion. We'll just save our shader. Okay, let's pull in our urn that we just imported. Again, it's very small. I could go back into Max and scale it up there, but we can do it here. The size that it imports, so that really isn't that important. Again, I made the urn a separate object instead of adding it, attaching it to the garden terrace, to the terrace piece here itself, because I'm using a separate UV map for my urn. I should be doing this in the top viewport as opposed to the orthographic. It'll make it easier. But it's more visually interesting for you guys by me doing it here as opposed to jumping into wireframe mode here. It's still a bit small though, so let's make it a bit bigger. Just flying around it to make sure it looks like it's sitting in the right spot. Let's check the size here from a distance. That should be good. Yeah, that should be good. Alright, let's duplicate it. Again, by duplicating it, we aren't going to be loading it into memory again. We're going to be saving on memory. Computer's only read it into memory once, and it's just referencing it again. Wait. Okay, we're going to duplicate it twice more. And that should be good. All right. I may just take a quick break, guys. I'm going to grab a fresh cup of coffee. I'll be back in a few minutes time, so I'll leave you with my be right back screen and grab a coffee, and I'll be right back. Okay. Just gonna again grab a quick drink here. My mouth gets really dry. You're quite welcome, the real defiled chaos. I hope I could help. Okay. Let's just have a look what we've done here. We've got our small garden terrace piece here placed. Again, I'm just checking the sizings we've got going on. What I may do here is I think it may be a tiny bit too big, so I'm going to select everything. Now we could make a blueprint out of this if we wanted to place it again, but I'm not going to be using this asset again, so I'm just going to leave it as separate objects. Just going to scale it down just a little bit. Again, our urns are a different scale, so they're going to move out of position. We can put them back though. Move them back. I just felt looking at it from a distance, it looked a little bit too big. Just wanted to bring it down just a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to place some trees in these urns, some conifer trees. So let's just make sure that they're back in line. That's okay. All right. Let's bring in some trees to place inside of our urns. So I'm going to go into my foliage subfolder here where I keep all my trees. I'm going to import a tree I created for those urns. And let me see if I can remember what I called it. I did put urn on the end of the name, so it shouldn't be too hard to find. He says as he can't find it. I have a couple of azalea bushes here I'm going to be bringing in for the sides of the path as well. But I'm more concerned with our urns just at this minute. Where did I put it? Black elderberry, blue spruce, elderberry flower. It is here. I know I did it on the weekend. It can't have disappeared. I have a Hollywood juniper topiary which I want to use just outside of the entrance to the actual building itself. My juniper pots, that's the one. I knew I'd get there in the end. We didn't have to make any adjustments to the material because speed trees come in fully. The material comes in fully, so I've just got to wait for it to compile its shaders here on that new object we just loaded in. And we're going to place them in these pots that are on top of our little terrace section here. Again, that's just going to help to add a bit more interest through our actual path area. Alright. Again, this is a fully animated, wind animated plant. So once I position it, I'm going to actually scale it up a little bit because it looks a bit tiny to me. Maybe like that. We're going to do the same thing again. We're going to duplicate it so we don't use more memory in the game engine. And one more time. Okay. Again, that just gives us, like I said, a bit of height, a bit more interest on our actual terrace through here. Alright. Let's look at our sides of our path here now, I think. Again, we have this slight shadow line which is going to be covered up now by our foliage, so let's what do we start with? Let's start with grass, I think, and we can build from there. So I'm going to jump into my foliage tool here in Unreal, and I have a backyard grass that I'm using. It's the same one I used outside here. Now I want to make sure everything else is deselected because I don't want to be painting anything else apart from that grass at this stage. That looks good. And I'm painting the grass right up to the edge of our path, as well as up to the edge of the of our entryway here. You see there's a couple of pieces of grass that have come in at an angle. We'll come in and fix that in just a minute. That's because I have align to normal turned on. If you don't want your grass to do that, you can turn that off, but I want the grass to follow the hills of the actual terrain. So I'm leaving align to normal turned on over here. But it will mean a couple of our grass pieces here are going to look a little odd until we fix them. I'm not going to completely cover all of the landscape with grass. I'm going to leave a couple of open areas. Just here and there, mainly around these water spots. Again, it just makes it look a bit more interesting if we have some water showing and we don't completely go nuts with our grass. Did you see how it just helps to define the pathway a lot more? We're not finished by any means. We've got to add a lot more flowering to the sides, but it does help to draw the eye down the path.
Can you still
Again, I'm not going to go past the end of our path at this stage. I don't want to paint grass in here until we get our building in. Right, finish the grass off there, I think. Okay, let's just go through and fix a couple of these grassy pieces that are sitting up off the terrain. I'm going to go into sub-object mode here in my foliage tool, my select tool, just so I can rotate a couple of these pieces into line. And I just like to scale up a couple of pieces here and there as well, just to make the grass look a bit more interesting. This side's not too bad. Alright. Jumping out of my foliage tool for a minute so I don't accidentally move something when I don't want to. I'm just running over the top of my grass here to make sure there are no bits sticking up that shouldn't be. And just one more piece here needs to be fixed up a little bit. There we go. Looks like one more piece just here. Okay. Alright, so we have our grass laid down. Now we have to start filling in these empty areas a bit more to make it look a bit more interesting through here. So, now I do have a chenille, which is something I created for the inside of the building, which is this thing here. You guys call it a chenille in the US. We call it a monsteria here in Australia. Again, it moves in the wind. If I just let it sit for a minute, it may not animate actually in this viewport, but it does actually move in the wind. I did make it for the inside of the building, but I think it would look okay outside as well. So what I may do, I think, is add it as actually in our foliage here. So I'm going to drag it into my foliage editor, turn off my grass. Now I'm going to have to play with my values to get a good setting because we haven't used this before. So I'm going to start by painting in, and I'm going to have to undo it probably because it's not going to be right. But again, it's the first time we've used it, so the engine has to recompile the shader. I really wish it wasn't going so dark all the time. I know it's a bit too small, I think, at the moment, so I'm just going to wait for the shader to recompile because I do want to, once it's compiled once, we won't have to wait for it to recompile again. I'm going to undo this paint that I've just done though. I'm going to make them a little bit bigger. And I'm going to alter the scale on them a bit as well, because at the moment it's using a scale of 1 to 1. If we look over here, we can see there's no scaling going on. It's just keeping everything the same height. I'm going to change that. So I'm actually going to make them a little bigger initially as well. So I'm going to go to maybe 2 to 3. So we'll have a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 3. We'll do a paint again. Again, I'm just going to pull back a bit here and see what that's done. Now again, we may be able to go just a little bit bigger, I think. So we'll go a minimum of 2.4, and we can go a bit bigger as well to a maximum of 3.5. Now I'm going to pull back on the density as well because it's a bit thick. I think that's better. The size is okay, the density is looking okay. And I want to paint them in through here. But again, to keep balance, I want to do it on both sides, so we have our Chanels on either side of our entryway. That should be good. Alright, now I do have some, I'm just going to get out of foliage mode for a minute so we can move around without accidentally clicking something. And if I just keep the camera still here for a minute, you can see them moving in the wind. It's very subtle, but you know, I'm not creating a scene where everything's blowing in a gale, so I want everything to be pretty subtle. Remember, less is more. It's always good rule of thumb. But we're going to bring in some flowering bushes now as well to make this entryway look a bit more interesting. So I have some azaleas, let's bring them in. And they're just flowering bushes. I have some that are flowering and some that aren't, so let's bring in one of the normal ones to begin with.